So I'm Nick McLaughlin. I'm the Product Marketing Manager at Adobe Ad Cloud APAC. And today we're here to talk to you, as Jez said, about emerging channels and trending topics. And it's really important because change is the only constant for today's marketer. And the lightning speed at which technology and consumption is evolving is leaving many marketers struggling to keep up with their audiences. So every year, as Jeremy said, seems to bring new formats and metrics which are gracing the ad tech press as necessities. But it actually leaves many disillusioned and wondering whether we've moved away from what's important. In reality, it could be a lot more simple, and today we're going to try to break it down to find out what's important. With me today, I've got Ash Cooper, Head of Advertising Services for Adobe Ad Cloud ANZ, and Annalise Booker, the Data and Technology Lead at Carlton United Breweries, who's kind of tackling this head-on from a brand perspective. So to create some clarity, we've identified two key areas where we see a lot of change happening. Number one is that the way that we consume content has fundamentally changed and will continue to change. Media is fragmented, and we're now watching, listening, and reading more content on more devices in more ways than ever before. So what are some of the key shifts, and how can they fit into a marketer's strategy? And two, the way we buy and sell media is constantly evolving. The fragmentation of content means this is so, and programmatic, no longer a channel, is here to stay. This brings great opportunities as well as some challenges, and Ash is going to dive into 4 trending topics that are really important and identify what they actually mean for you. And we've got Annalise to kind of provide us the brand perspective along the way. So let's get started. For decades, the way we consume content was really, really simple. We had 3 mass content mediums in TV, radio, and print, all with a few major players controlling the means of distribution. But what we consumed was on other people's terms, and content was produced to appeal to the masses. Now, the internet fundamentally changed this. New ways to easily disseminate content emerged, paving the way for pioneers such as Spotify, Netflix, and Facebook to open up the door to a new age where the consumer was in control. And since then, everyone from tech giants to local incumbents have been innovating to create environments that will entice people to spend more time on their platform. So the consumption experience has changed for the better, and let's take a look at a few. Starting with TV, and this has now become just video. The days of rushing home to catch the latest episode of a show or sitting through reruns because there's nothing else on are gone forever. Viewers have more choice and control than ever before, and broadcasters, production houses, and tech giants alike are actively competing for every minute of our leisure time, and they're no longer constrained by content ceilings or production boundaries. With algorithms designed to help you watch more and more of what you love, we're in a golden era for content. And the data says that Australians are loving it. By 2022, Australia's forecast to have 22 million paid video-on-demand subscribers. And this doesn't even mention the huge amount of content that's already consumed on the ad-supported platforms. And while the early days of digital saw consumers flocking to their laptops, the TV has been retooled for the internet era, and consumers are following suit, with around 50% of total digital viewing consumed on this screen. So TV is still king, but just in a totally different way. Since we're mainly focusing on connected TV, we're going to quickly define it as there's a few different definitions out there. So when we're talking about connected TV, we're looking at any content that is streamed over the internet via a television screen. And this can be done either through the smart TV itself, gaming consoles, or other attached devices, such as Chromecast, Telstra TV, Fetch, or Apple TV. And in Australia, nearly 70% of this supply comes from attached devices. And this shows that consumers are actively going out to purchase products that will deliver them the best streaming experience in the new age of TV. So with every new TV essentially having the inbuilt functionality to do this as well, and the interface is improving every month, the amount consumed will only continue to increase. So increasingly, the younger generation is shunning traditional TV for video-on-demand platforms, and most of Australians under 65 are starting to follow suit. And this change in consumption has amplified some challenges between TV and video that have been bubbling for years. So previously, budgets across TV have been very siloed, and connected TV has blurred these lines by combining the experience of TV with the data-driven world of digital. But the questions for advertisers is how do we ensure and measure reach across both, and we're just not wasting money by diving into each. And we've also seen a call for addressability in the digital channels, with several different publishers and buying platforms releasing their own versions of addressability. But in reality, we're going to need a blanket, kind of solution at scale to ensure that we can have a strong solution for advertisers such as Carlton United Breweries to do this at scale.
It's a big challenge for us. No longer can we actually just invest in a really expensive TVC and blast that message out to people. It's much more about where our consumers are and making sure that we're present in those moments. So we still look at screens, but we're looking at how we can create more of a multi-sensory experience for consumers. So we might look at how TV, outdoor and mobile actually work together more effectively. Super excited about where connected TV is going because it brings those metrics closer together, which is going to be a big change for our business.
And do you still lead with that big flashy TV ad and just kind of shoehorn that into the emerging devices, or are you looking at each of those in isolation?
It's definitely an evolution for our business. We do still lead with TV on our big brands, but we're looking at trying to go past a channel and try and find what that either human or cultural truth is before defining what the channels are. So an example may be Victoria Bitter, which we all know is synonymous with knockoff. Knockoff in the 70s is very different to knockoff now, and people knock off at very different times. So we can't just play the VB jingle at 3 p.m. on a Friday and hope that people buy our beer. We actually have to be present in the moments when a dad might pick his kids up from school, or people might be knocking off from a late shift overnight. So yeah, it's evolved.
Cool.
Great. So what we're hearing is that the TVC is now just one part of an advertiser's video strategy. And outside of already the TV digital kind of challenge that we're seeing, another challenge that we see is that viewership is considerable within the walled gardens. So some, like Netflix, have no ads at all, while others don't provide the ability to independently verify and compare with other formats effectively. And this is actually really important because not all video is the same. Using simple performance metrics to compare something like user-generated content to premium-produced long-form video really doesn't get at the difference between the two. And in reality, there's a huge difference for a brand between a 6-second ad used to create short-term awareness or a 30-second plus TV spot with the intention to build things like long-term brand loyalty, brand affinity, or prestige. So the question is, where do we value data and where do we value content and context? All video has a place in an advertiser's strategy, but we need to thinking more strategically and marrying our intentions for the screen with the way that we measure success. And that's because 2019, it's all going to ramp up again. Disney and ESPN are going to launch their over-the-top service that they've been talking about as a competitor for Netflix, and they've bought 21st Century to bolster their content. AT&T has famously finally completed their acquisition of Time Warner, as well as ad tech platform AppNexus, to win the war in connected TV. More locally, we've seen two really strong hybrids forming. CBS last year completed their acquisition of Network 10, and along with their plans to launch All Access in the market, we're going to see a really strong on-demand player next year. While Nine and Fairfax's recent $4.2 billion merger will bring together their market-leading 9Now platform with Stan, which is the strongest Netflix competitor in this market. Not to be outdone, since taking their contact back from Yahoo 7, Seven West Media has built a really impressive platform, pioneering the shift to digital of sport with the Australian Open, Winter Olympics, Commonwealth Games, and soon-to-be cricket starting to be consumed on digital platforms. While SBS has quietly built one of the strongest on-demand platforms in market on the back of great content and reduced ad loads, trying to find out what consumers actually want to consume and then giving it to them. They also found a lot of success with the World Cup, where some others might not have. So sport has changed an incredible amount in the last 20 years. Take cricket, for example. A long 5-day format and an ageing male fan base left the sport losing audiences to other sports and experiences. But they adapted. The invention of 2020 has taken over, with franchises and leagues popping up all over the world, bringing women and kids back to the sport. And this is the perfect example of a sport adapting to the era of entertainment. And this has been proven by the intense battle for their sports rights. In India, the Indian Premier League was bought for $2.55 billion by Star, beating out bids from the likes of Facebook. While in Australia, the changing of the guard here was bought by Foxtel and Seven with a $1.2 billion bid, proving that sports is still huge business. And it's not just cricket. All sports are starting to adapt to the 21st century and reaping the benefits. So now that sports is in the entertainment business, it's treated as such by consumers. Viewers and fans are now a much bigger part of the spectacle than ever before, and as such consume more than ever, whether it be live, highlights, articles, or interactions with the athletes, who are some of the most valuable assets on the planet with their huge social media followings. So all of this really leads to the question for brands, how do you amplify and measure something like a sports sponsorship in the modern era? And how do you connect in a variety of ways with the new diverse fan bases of the sports?
Cool. So, Annalise, alcohol, sport kind of goes hand in hand, and obviously a really big part of the CUB brand and engagement with fans. So how do you engage with fans, through the likes of the NRL and the AFL in this changing environment?
Yeah, sport is huge for CB and will remain a really big passion point for Australians, so it's important for us that we evolve with the codes and with broadcast partners. We've had a long-standing relationship with the AFL and the NRL, and they are evolving a lot as well with the new need for different types of content on different channels. But for us, we've seen the biggest change move from being just about the game to being so much more now about the fans and how you're interacting with fans. So we can't just rely on a broadcast integration package, or we can't rely on just a shirt sponsorship to do the job for us. This year was the first time we really tried to break the mould on that, and we had broadcast sponsorship for Carlton Dry for the State of Origin. And we actually thought, let's use this as an opportunity to start to interact more with the fans. The challenge that we always have is that we know people are watching sport in multiple different occasions. They may be at the pub with friends, they may be at home, or they may be at the game itself. And how do you actually position your brand with some sort of value in all of those different locations without being an obstruction to the game? So we looked at an on-pack promotion that we already had running in market, where you would go into a store, you'd buy a slab of beer, and you could unlock a messenger bot which would start a conversation with you about the game. It would serve you 4 potential moments that could happen in the game. So they could be first penalty, or Queensland to lose, or something really obvious like that. I'm New South Wales here. And so when the game actually went live, if those moments happened in real time, they would send you a prize to say you've won a pizza or you've won a car. And what it did is it meant we could interact with people during the game, but it also actually helped validate some assumptions we had around younger consumers viewing live sport. And they very much are there. We saw over 80,000 young consumers involved in this promotion, but they just weren't necessarily engaging just on TV. They wanted to be communicated through mobile during the game.
Cool.
Great. I think it's so interesting to see how a classic brand like Carlton United Breweries is adapting to the digital space. And another area where this is really pertinent is radio, which, like TV becoming video, has become just audio. So the success of someone like Spotify working with the major record labels to create a market-leading product has led to one of the cleanest shifts from offline listening to online. And the people have well and truly spoken in Australia. Nearly 90% of us under 65 use digital devices to stream audio, be it Spotify, Apple Music, podcasts, or anything else. However, the monetization is still catching up. And like TV, the challenges lie in siloed offline versus online budgets, as well as how to best adapt to the new medium. A big radio ad on a trade site is totally different to, communicating with a consumer within their ears. And another way that audio is set to change marketers' strategy again in 2019 will be in voice search. The accuracy of voice searches is now at 95%, and the penetration of devices like Google Home and Amazon Alexa is starting to hit mass levels. These devices are set to be the next battleground for the tech giants to start owning the home, so expect questions about your voice strategy in 2019. Now, the old mediums have undergone a fundamental shift from an era based on availability to the era of choice and discovery. Consumers are more flexible than ever before and are changing their habits at a more rapid pace. So it's really important to ensure that you're consistently innovating to be able to keep up. So, 3 key takeaways from us today. What should advertisers do with this? Number 1, be brave. New formats can be really daunting, but diving in to define what they mean for you and your business can reap huge rewards and put you ahead of your competition. Number 2, define your own success. Most of the challenges with these new formats and trends come with trying to fit old metrics into new mediums. So things like viewability on connected TV or completion rate of audio are really terrible proxies of defining success in these formats. So we need to work out, where do these products actually sit in the branding funnel? What we're actually trying to achieve, rather than working backwards to shoehorn it in. And 3, find a single source of truth. So in a fragmented future, your audiences are going to be everywhere, inside and outside walls, across multiple screens. To truly ensure that you're allocating your spend in the right areas to where your audiences are, you'll need an independent, agnostic source of measurement to bring it back to what's actually important for you.
So Annalise, taking all of this into consideration, what's important for you and what's been the focus for CUB in this evolving landscape?
Yeah, I think all of these are really important. They all rely on business clarity, which I think is probably something we all face day to day. Australia, as we know, is often the test market for a lot of pilots, and that means that you need to be pretty clear on what your overall business objective is so you don't get lost in all of those global objectives. So for us, it's really about taking the whole business on the journey with you, whether that's training your marketing team and upskilling them, or making sure that communication's really clear with your senior leaders so that we're all speaking in the same language. We really recently took in a lot of digital capability in-house, which was around production and social media, and that was really, really new for our business. We had to change what success looked like and make sure we got buy-in from the right people to actually make sure that operated effectively. So I think clarity is sort of the main piece that's overarching across these three things.
Awesome. Cool. So all of these challenges are happening, but the fun thing is that we're not done yet. Search and social currently make up an estimated 36% of total advertising spend. That's online and offline. But the way we search, discover, and buy is going to change, and that's going to be really fun for everyone that works in technology. So Google Search has been a core part of the marketing strategy as the key way to influence consumers when they're looking for a specific product. However, one of the biggest tech giants is looking to get a step closer to the purchase point. While new devices and technologies such as voice search, augmented reality, or VR could move the search away from the keyboard altogether. So what would a presentation on the future be without Amazon? The global juggernaut is building a business at a new level of scale and is set to be the world's next trillion-dollar company. And they've disrupted whole industries from retail to supermarkets. Amazon Prime has now over 100 million global subscribers as of April 2018. So just entering a market sets the rest of that industry into a panic and can see competitors' stocks drop by billions of dollars. So it would be naive to think that their foray into advertising and marketing will be any different. And actually, they've already built a multi-billion-dollar advertising business, and they're set to change the game by being both the marketplace and the search hub. Now, many in the US already go straight to Amazon for a lot of products, and if this gets replicated in Australia, this could change the way a lot of Australian advertisers allocate their marketing budgets. And we're in the very early days here, but digital advertising is about to change again. And what we do next could decide whether the marketer or the tech giants are in control. Because very quickly, we've entered a world where the lines between media and technology are blurred. And a marketer must assess all media in a way that's independent in order to achieve the perfect balance. While many media and tech hybrids will develop performance solutions that will work best on their own platforms, marketers must set their own KPIs and utilize independent measurement to hold media to account. Because the next phase of advertising lies in marketing stacks rather than point solutions, which fuse together both marketing tech and advertising tech. And as a marketer, you'll want a stack that can access all formats independent of media ownership to ensure that your dollars are being optimized to your business objectives, not to the vested interests of others. And that's kind of the vision for Adobe Advertising Cloud. Now, the era of discovery has created a necessary shift in the way that we market to consumers, from mass production to mass personalization. And this means the expectation for advertising has also evolved. Consumers want you to know them, deliver you creatively engaging, relevant experiences, no matter where they interact with you. And this is fundamentally why programmatic continues to grow as a channel and is set to hit nearly $70 billion globally in 2018. Right, Ash?
Absolutely, Nick. And in years gone by, we probably would have thought about programmatic as a trending topic, and it would have been in a deck probably last year as well. But, you know, as Nick's spoken about, we've seen a lot of change around technology and how the consumption habits have evolved. Particularly over the last 18 months, it's made it more difficult to reach our consumers as well, and it's fundamentally changed that planning and buying process. But what are some of the other shifts that we've seen in advertising, and what else do we need to understand in order to stay on top of this evolving landscape? So this is not an exhaustive list, but today we're going to touch on a lot of the key topics that are trending, and certainly a lot of things that we get asked about on a regular basis. I'll touch lightly on them. We'll cover off what they mean, and what you can do to ensure that your digital transformation stays on track and doesn't lose momentum. So the first topic we're going to dive into today is on transparency and the value chain. Now, this isn't something that has just appeared overnight. It's evolved over time. But brands and advertisers, they began to unravel those many layers behind advertising technology in an attempt to get closer to all the details on ad tech. When they couldn't get as close as they wanted, or they saw things they didn't like, everything started to come into question. And everyone would know Mark Pritchard from P&G, very famous for this. He certainly championed this notion of kind of calling digital out. he had a look under the hood. He didn't like what he saw. He started to question things. Things like ad fraud and bots, these words started to become, spoken about quite frequently. And so digital came into question. And at the same time, they trimmed $200 million from their digital ad spend in 2017, which kind of really forced the digital ecosystem to clean up its act. But it didn't stop there. Other brands were now going through that same process. Digital was well and truly in the spotlight, and everyone was taking a look now. More questions were being asked, and rightfully so, more demands were being made of all their digital partners. So topics like brand safety, media quality, cost transparency, campaign measurement, it was very common that these have been questioned on a daily basis. This really came under scrutiny. But the positive thing was we saw a lot of brands doing some self-evaluation. They looked back at how they operate. And when we look at how they've changed, we've seen big changes around brands understanding and getting more transparency into their contracts, understanding what's the devil in the detail. Diving deeper into the relationships with all their partners, whether they're agencies or ad tech vendors. And I think most importantly, they decided to invest more of their advertising dollars in quality and brand safe environments, which is a win for the publishers as well. Brands are also now having a more direct involvement in how digital is being executed, which now brings them closer to the action, and it removes any of that ambiguity or the unknowns that can come with digital advertising. So if you aren't a part of those brands that are already taking charge in this space, what are some simple steps that you can do? So first of all, work with partners that will share all their cost and show you how that they're adding value. Demand transparency where there is none. Always ask questions and keep scratching at the surface until you're satisfied with those answers. And lastly, where you can, push for standardization of all your metrics and leverage third-party measurement tools to verify and validate things like your campaign performance, audience performance, brand safety, and viewability.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of talk about advertisers taking their, wanting to see more about what was going on in the advertising ecosystem. And Carlton United Breweries was actually one to take their programmatic in-house in 2017, Annalise. So was getting more transparency a major factor behind this?
Yeah, absolutely. Even as a base level, just in the alcohol industry, we subscribe to the ABAC code, which is the Alcoholic Beverages Advertising Code, and that just lifts ethical marketing in Australia, right? So it's hugely important when you look at inventory transparency to make sure that we're reaching consumers that are 18 plus and they're in brand safe environments and they're not around any violent content or children's content. So that's sort of the basic part of it. But the programmatic in-house piece actually came from a working model in New York as part of Anheuser-Busch, and they wanted to pilot that in Australia. And so they said, we're going to trade in New York against Australian inventory, and we want to see if we can scale this sort of trading house. And it didn't work. It completely flopped. And there's a few really key reasons why. They didn't know our premium partners. They didn't understand our landscape and our inventory. And they also didn't realise that the cost of video, specifically for us in Australia, was a lot higher. So they were buying into a lot of places that we wouldn't necessarily call premium. So through being able to actually see what inventory they were buying and how they were optimising, we could pretty quickly see we needed local expertise on that work. So we quickly moved to a model that was much more collaborative with our local Adobe team, with our local agency. And I actually remember having a meeting with Jeremy, and he brought in this massive graph which showed the moment we went from having just global running it to the point where the local team stepped in, and how quickly our CPMs reduced and our viewability increased. And it was a really important moment for us to, I guess, while global are going to always give you pilots, define what that means in your market and make sure you're really clear on what success is for your own market, not just sort of adopting that global best practice.
Totally. Sounds like that human element is still really important.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. So, going from human elements into an exciting topic. So, artificial intelligence and advertising, or AI as it's commonly known as. So, AI is everywhere these days. AI this, AI that. It's in our phones, cars, fridges, our home stereos. It's really become a part of our everyday lives with all the devices that we are engaging with. But it's also deeply entrenched into your advertising technology. But what does that mean for us exactly, and how can we apply it? So thankfully, when we're talking about robots or self-driving cars at this point, it's much simpler than that. It's something that everyone in this room today can take advantage of, and I'm certain probably most of us already are, once we really strip it back and simplify it. And so studies show that marketing and sales initiatives are the highest priority for the application of AI, followed closely by customer service. And these days we see more and more data than ever before from more and more signals. And when you think about it, no human could ever process or learn from this information at the speed we need to in order to take action. So we need an effective way of using all of this data and processing it in order to make better informed decisions that ultimately are going to lead to better business outcomes. If you were in the keynote yesterday, you would have heard our CEO, Shantanu, talking about Adobe Sensei. Now, this is a huge focus for Adobe, and not just across our advertising software, but across the wider Adobe business. So Adobe Sensei uses artificial intelligence and machine learning to help you discover those hidden opportunities, make tedious process faster, and offer relevant experiences to every customer. And when we look at it from an advertising perspective, this could be something as simple as, finding more prospects that look like your existing high-value customer base, or personalizing a message based on that user's last engagement with your brand, or something as simple as, what keyword is driving the greatest outcome for my search advertising. And so put simply, AI, machine learning, but Adobe Sensei helps you work better, smarter, and faster. And so where can you get started with AI? And let's start really simple. So the first step is understand if there's any application of it with your current technology partners and where is it implemented. Identify if it's needed in your business, okay? What's important for you, and don't just go chasing AI for the sake of having AI. And lastly, if you do invest in this area, make sure you're getting the most out of it by feeding all the machines and the technology with as much high quality data as possible to better understand who your consumers are and what your prospects look like. Okay, probably one of, if not the hottest topic of 2018, the area of data management and safety. I'm sure a lot of us have heard of GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, lots of controversy around Facebook, Trump, Cambridge Analytica. You couldn't really avoid these areas in 2018. Data management, safety and security are certainly paramount now. And if this didn't impact you in your day job, you probably all had an inbox full of emails asking you to opt back into communications in this post-GDPR world. And so as brands continue to think about ways they can combine all of their data and other sources to gain that holistic view of the customer, it started to pose a lot of questions. What types of data are available? Are they trusted sources? What's the safest way to control this data flow? All the while, we now have to be respecting the privacy of the consumer. And so we're well aware of just how important data has become. It's crucial to delivering a message that is both on point and unique to that individual. But it's also easy to get this wrong. Customer data can sit in silos. You have fragmentation across your engagement platforms. And this is what largely contributes to failing to deliver on that unified view and delivering that customer experience. And so if you're talking about data in 2018, as I said, you can't really escape GDPR. It's definitely been at the forefront of all marketers' minds. Even if you aren't in Europe, we're certainly going to be affected by this at some point. And so what we've seen as a result is, if you don't have consent to the data that you're building your business on, you can be in a lot of trouble. Now, numerous ad tech companies have already begun to wind down operations across Europe directly as a result of these regulation changes. They simply didn't have consent or the direct relationship with the consumer in order to use and collect that data. And the second thing we've seen is, the walls are raising even higher across other technology giants. Changes made by Google and Facebook, they've made it much tougher to get your data out of their platforms. And so marketers have had to reevaluate their data strategies, understand who are the partners that they're working with, where does their data come from, is it safe to use, but also you can ask yourself the question, is it time that you take control of your own data and invest in your data strategies? And so at Adobe, we firmly believe in giving total control, but also flexibility to take ownership of your data and execute it in a way that drives success. So what should you do in the area of data in 2018? So I guess you just have to start realizing that it's more important than ever to start focusing on and investing in and also taking control of your data. It's going to be your most important asset moving forward. Take stock of who your current data partners are. How do they collect data? Is it safe to use? And ultimately, if something like GDPR does come to Australia, will your data partners still be in business? And if they're not, what's the impact going to be on you? And where possible, let technology do the heavy lifting for you, not just from controlling the data and segmenting it, but opening up new opportunities to access better and more unique data in order to drive your business forward.
So I think CUB is a business that really has taken data seriously and has kind of unified those silos. So why is it so important for CUB analysts to have kind of these things working so closely together?
We don't have direct access to transaction data, so that means it's really difficult to attribute an advertising dollar to sales in our business. So the past 2 years for us have been trying to figure out what data we have access to within inside our business, but also what data we need to be bringing in. We're absolutely preparing for a world where consumers will buy our products without even knowing they need them. So we need to be in that repertoire of brands that they think of during that purchase. So we're starting really with our owned assets, and we're looking at second-party data partnerships in Australia. We've got a couple that are about to launch, which is really exciting. And it's not at all to get to that one-to-one personalised messaging for us just yet. It's more about identifying the gaps where we know our consumers are and our brands aren't there yet. So getting a better view of the marketplace so that we can actually be more efficient with where our media dollars are being placed.
Yeah, great. Cool.
Okay, so jumping into our last topic today, I wanted to look at how the industry has responded to some of the concerns with digital advertising. And what we'll focus on is the ads.txt initiative. And this is super important. It's really helped drive and provide standardization across the industry. But let's take a step back first. Why do we have ads.txt in the first place? What's the issue we're trying to solve here? And it really starts with ad fraud. And on this room today, we all know that ad fraud can be a problem. We've already seen large amounts of money spent against fraudulent inventory or inventory that's been misrepresented. Quite frankly, it's not good enough. So ads.txt is one of the first and one of many initiatives towards fighting ad fraud. So what is ads.txt? Looks a bit confusing. First of all, I'll define it. Ads does not stand for ads. It actually stands for authorized digital sellers. And so this is an IAB approved text file. It sits on the publisher's website and it aims to prevent unauthorized inventory sales, and it allows buyers to check the validity of the inventory that they're purchasing. Essentially, this is a public record of all the parties that are allowed to sell ad space for a certain publisher. And what's most exciting is, seeing the adoption rate, not just globally, but locally, we're seeing almost 100% of Australian publishers adopting this standard. And to put it into a real-world example, to really simplify it, think of when you go online, you find something you want to purchase, but you'd rather go in store and buy that. So you generally go to the locate a store, find us page. You find a retailer that is authorized to sell that product, you then go in and make that purchase. So ads.txt, it aims to deliver that same verification and sense check for all buyers of digital ad inventory. And at Adobe Advertising Cloud, we are constantly crawling ads.txt files to create an automated way to provide that ads.txt protection for all of our buyers. So what do we do with ads.txt? That first step is understanding what's the problem that ads.txt is trying to solve, and hopefully this morning kind of get you started on that first step. But check with all of your technology partners and ensure that they are implementing this initiative. Secondly, be prepared for an increase in pricing. I know this sounds strange, but once you start to weed out the bad actors in the ecosystem who have previously misrepresented what they sold, you start getting exposed to real inventory, genuine pricing, and accurate performance. And like all things in life, if it's too good to be true, it most likely is. And lastly, finally, get to know your supply partners across the technology space. Build a relationship with them and understand the value that they're bringing to the business. The most exciting thing is, ad tech is growing at a rapid pace. Businesses are all coming into Australia and localizing. It's in your best interest to start to talk to them, engage with them, and understand how they're going to add value and understand the technology as well. So where do we go to from here? Nick has touched on these points, but be brave. Be a Mark Pritchard. Call things out. Work hand in glove with your partners and keep chipping away until you're satisfied with the progress that's being made. Ensure that you're defining your own success. It's super easy to get caught up in all the headlines or get blinded by the next shiny thing. What you need to do is work out what matters most to your business. Nick talked about completion rates on connected TV. those things are proxies. They're probably not going to define success for your business. So work out what that is and get everyone working towards that same objective. And most importantly, keep trying to find that single source of truth. As everything feels like and everything starts to look like, and yes, it most probably is getting more complex, having a trusted and independent hub to bring it all back together to what's most important for your business, it's going to be a major factor in finding success for yourselves.
Yeah, so I think to round it out, and no pressure, what does all of this kind of mean for CUB, and kind of how are you going to use this to sell more beer?
To sell more beer.
More generally.
Yeah, well, I think all of this is exciting for us, right? Because it just means that the conversations being had around transparency and needing premium publishers and good relationships in market. So all of that, I think, is an exciting thing for the future of ad tech. The biggest thing I think for all of us on this is just keeping it really, really simple. In our business, it's very much about how you can communicate all of this to show how it solves a business problem or how it sells more beer. And I think if you can evaluate the market based on whether you are solving a business problem or whether you can prove it sells more beer, then you can actually move quite quickly and you can get buy-in from senior leaders in that way. It's only when we sort of start to get overwhelmed and overcomplicated with a lot of this stuff that we lose that traction. So I think my biggest piece from all this is take the business along with you, but try and do it in a simple way that's connected to a clear business problem.
Great. I think that's a great way to round it out.
Absolutely. So that wraps up our part of the presentation. I'll hand back to Jeremy now for the panel.
Thank you. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Ash, Annalise, and Nick. Now, I just want to call up my panellists. So please, Kathy Domitopoulos, Head of Performance Marketing for Suncorp, Juliette Steed, VP of Asia Pacific for Talaria, and Keith Eadie, VP of Advertising Cloud. All right, so maybe start with some introductions. Kathy.
Sure. So, is this on? Can everyone hear? So my name's Kathy. I work at Suncorp, and I'm really involved in, I suppose, some of the strategic work we're doing around our digital marketing foundations, looking at ad tech, and really starting to develop points of view around programmatic trading. It was great to see in the previous presentation, a focus on ads tech. So we're doing quite a lot in media quality, and really focused on the ecosystem we buy in.
Cool.
Hi guys, so I'm Juliette and I work for Talaria, so I'm the Vice President across Asia Pacific. Talaria is a supply-side platform, so we specifically work in video, so any internet-delivered video is essentially running through our pipes. In terms of Australia, we work with Channel 9, Channel 7, Channel 10, Foxtel, News Corp, SBS, a whole load of others. So essentially, for those publishers, wherever they're wanting to make sure that their supply is available to be bought through programmatic pipes, it runs through our platform. Our platform then has server-side connections to all of the demand-side platforms that are representing a good number of brands so that those brands can access that supply programmatically. And I hope that makes sense because it can sometimes be made far more confusing than it needs to be made.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Keith Eadie. I lead the Advertising Cloud business at Adobe. So I've got the product engineering and go-to-market teams that work with our brands and agencies to use the platform to the fullest extent. And thanks for engaging on this type of content so early in the morning. I know it's esoteric, but I thought the team did a good job of breaking it down, and we'll do some Q&A at the end too if you have questions.
Cool. So, Kathy, you brought up a topic there, some of the stuff that you're doing at the moment. If we work it back, ads.txt, do you care about that as a marketer, and why do you care about it?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. It was great to see the adoption rates up there. But I think traditionally as marketers, we've given the ownership to our agencies to really look at the way we buy media and that supply chain. So for a marketer, being able to verify that their premium is so important. So that's a really great initiative. And I think we as marketers need to be aware of that because we spend a lot of money within digital media in Australia and we need to start having a bit more trust and accountability for how we buy media. Talk
about being brave. You've just done a partnership with IAS. Why did you make that to have a direct relationship rather than just leaving up to your agency?
Yeah, so Suncorp's partnered up with Integral Ad Science, so they're a third-party verification tool, and it's a really exciting project. So whilst it's really a tech project in some ways, we're implementing tracking and that, it was really important for us to have that third-party verification. We know in all of our ad tech that there's a lot of work already being done in making sure there's brand-safe inventory, ad fraud's mitigated, but we wanted to have that overarching view of our media and really delve into media quality as another metric to how we optimise our media. So it's been really exciting because, as I said, it's a tech implementation, but the focus has been on the people and also the process. So you can never just implement and expect people to adopt it. So it is exciting because it starts a new conversation about re-evaluating digital media that we're buying, not expecting low CPMs as an indicator of quality. And I think it does open up a conversation for the industry around how do we now talk to increasing viewability, buying different and buying quality over, low CPMs.
So talking about CPMs, Juliet, from the supply side, Ash mentioned that ads.txt may mean that CPMs may increase. Have you seen that on your side?
Yeah, absolutely. But that's because the CPMs were too low in the past because there was a lot of supply available in the market that wasn't what it said it was. And so ads.txt put a really good stop to that. It essentially prevented anybody from spoofing, so there was a lot of supply being sold as one thing and it was actually something entirely different. It may have been a display unit that was being resold as a video unit, for example, and that essentially meant that there was high volume supply available in market with low CPMs against it, but nobody was actually extracting any value from that apart from the fraudsters who were responsible in the first place. And so, it's a matter of saying if you expect quality, if you expect a really great brand experience, if you expect it to be seen by a human, you need to have a different benchmark in place around the CPMs that you should be paying for that supply. In terms of ads.txt, we adopted it really quickly, so we were responsible for ensuring that all of those publishers are ads.txt compliant and contain all of the code that verifies that we're a approved sort of platform for their supply to run through. So we're 100% ads.txt compliant across the globe, actually. Which is a huge thing for us to do, and we're really supportive of anything that creates standardisation and confidence in what's actually going on and that chain around who is dealing with this impression and what does it mean for a brand and for a buyer.
So is it a silver bullet or are there loopholes? Or?
With ads.txt specifically, there are a couple of things that I don't think are particularly great. So one is that it only works cross desktop. And we're seeing that a huge amount of supply is coming from other devices. I think mobile is probably going to be coming quite soon in terms of having a different iteration of ads.txt. Connected TV, obviously, it's pretty difficult to spoof connected TV. It's broadcast quality content that's on a big screen. So it's a different kettle of fish there. So that's one thing. It's only a desktop solution at the moment.
Great. Keith, I'm going to flick to you about data. A lot of brands that I work with feel they don't have much data. Is that true, or is there data that brands don't know that they actually own?
I think there's some verticals that obviously struggle to collect data in a privacy-compliant way that creates value back to their consumers such that they can actually use it to drive their media businesses. But even the most detached businesses from consumers are looking at opportunities to create loyalty programs to go direct to consumer for a portion of their business. So I think everybody understands that data will be the engine of their business in some shape or form in the future, and is looking at alternative ways that provides value back to the consumer, but also changes the way that they actually interact with their consumers such that they better understand how those people could potentially be marketed to. So you see different strategies and CPG and retail without e-com, those businesses definitely know they have some work to do to create a data relationship with their consumers.
So, with a global remit, you've obviously seen the implications or the follow-on effect of GDPR around the world. How has that affected Europe, and then what does that mean for us in Australia, and how's the flow-on effect?
You weren't first, so you should all be thankful for that. I think the industry, the regulatory bodies, our friend with the walled garden, I mean, generally we all cock this up really well in Europe. So I think having that guinea pig situation be out in front relative to digital advertising hopefully will mean that as other regions and governments move towards this type of privacy compliant consumer data protection world, that we do it in a more methodical way with clarity around what the regulations and laws actually are, how that applies to digital advertising, the obligations that then puts on the vendors in the marketplace such that we don't get a situation that we have in Europe. And the situation in Europe is basically a real lack of clarity and understanding from the regulatory bodies on what the laws intended for collection of data in a consent-driven way, and then how the vendors would implement that in technology. So we've gotten to a point that, May 26th, the day after GDPR implementation, audience targeting volumes fell by basically 90% across the industry. The most progressive marketers were out in front of this, and they already shifted to more context-based marketing and advertising and media strategies. So that overall volume only declined sort of 20 to 30%. And now we've come to a place where we're starting to build back up in terms of audience-based targeting as the technology vendors sort out things like the consent string and all the hops in the value chain has the individual consumer that we want to serve an ad to provided consent to each of the vendors in that value chain that they can then be targeted with digital advertising based on their audience data. So it's evolving. I think the one sort of obvious thing is that this is going to come to other regions, and the smart players are considering this a global phenomenon and preparing for it. And hopefully what we don't have is 8 different approaches to it.
That's my next question. So speaking of confusing, is that just California being California, or do you think that there is going to be a mosaic of different GDPR laws that us as marketers we're going to have to navigate?
California is ironic in that it's relatively progressive, but also houses all of these technology companies. So there's decent tension in Silicon Valley between those two forces. The California law is passed, but doesn't come into effect until 2020, and has basically provisions in the bill that there can be continued debate and amendments before it goes live in 2020. So we'll see if we even get to a place where it's just a California bill or if it's a US bill in a couple of years. But I don't think we can exist profitably as an industry and service consumers in a way that they expect if we have 15 different privacy regulations around the world. So hopefully that's not where we end up.
Great. The guys talked about measures of success. Kathy, you've got Adobe Analytics. Is that the source of truth, or is that the business unit source of truth? And are you working towards business objectives or media objectives when you're sort of working with your teams?
Yeah, I think measurement's a really interesting area. I like to sort of break it up by, if you're using analytics, that may be your business source of truth, because we've got a commercial reality as advertisers that we need to fulfill. So definitely, but I think it's just making the differentiation between channel metrics, your media metrics that you're going to be optimizing by, and making sure that you're leveraging that to get the best out of each channel. But definitely everyone wants that single source to say, this is what I've been able to achieve. That really talks to the business. I can see how as we start to look at those customer journeys and being able to talk to measurement in that framework will be quite interesting. The one thing I'd call out for measurement is that I think as marketers and advertisers, you need to have your own framework. And what I've seen is that there's been an over-reliance on agencies coming up with what success looks like. Just look at your campaign reporting, or if you're focused on just click-through rates. So I think there is a real opportunity to put structure around that. And I think that would help the industry and the ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah. And Juliet, measurement in your world, you spoke before around the challenges that connected TV and mobile have got. What challenges do you face?
Well, actually, I think with measurement, point that you just made then in terms of the measures of success that can often come back from agency groups can include things like viewability. Now, viewability should not be a measure of success. Viewability is a protection that's in place to protect a brand from appearing in an environment that is not inherently viewable. The concern that I have with viewability, and Nick communicated this really well in the presentation, is that viewability isn't consistently available across all platforms as a measurement. So, whether it's Moat or IAS, for example, they can measure viewability in certain situations and not in others. So connected TV, for example, cannot accommodate viewability measurement. The technology just isn't there to make that happen. And so for that to ever prevent any investment in connected TV, purely because of that prerequisite around measurement consistency, that is just kind of that's a problem. That's going to cause a huge barrier for brands to get involved in such an emerging media that's so important for accessing those audiences. So measurement, I think, has its place and it's really valuable, but you've just got to make sure that you're not expecting completely irrelevant measurements to come back from technologies where it's just not feasible.
Yeah. And Keith, talking about attribution and then all these emerging channels that are coming, how are you directing the team to be able to build products, to be able to have a single source of truth and provide meaningful metrics back to brands?
Yeah, I think measurement is going to change dramatically in the next 5 years, and certainly that's what we're driving towards, right? Advertising's existed in a silo for the last 50 years because we didn't provide the tools for it not to. And I'm blown away, not in a bad way, but the reality of organizations, of how many marketers I speak to that literally do not know the analytics team. They don't use analytics data or their broader customer data in their media strategies. And that comes back to, again, we haven't built tools that enable people to use their broader customer data to bring their advertising into their overall marketing strategy. And thus it's remained in a silo. So we've talked about measurement and attribution in a silo for so long, and we've dealt with the walled gardens and the fact that we can't measure across them. I think the next 5 to 10 years around measurement and attribution for media then becomes, okay, what's omni-channel attribution across owned, paid, and earned, right? It's not just about, okay, have we driven $1 million of impressions and gotten back 50 conversions? It's going to be about, how did I interact with a given consumer across my mobile app, across my email, across my .com, across my screen in store, and then what ads did I serve them as a result? And through my modeling as a brand, what contribution did I think that paid investment resulted in a sale? So I think that's where we have to drive the industry towards. And of course, we have to do that amongst the realities of Facebook and Google and data portability across those walled gardens. But if you were at the keynote yesterday and you heard Brad talk about the unified profile, that's our vision for how marketing and advertising come together, right? Every user has a rich behavioral set of data that represents how they've interacted with multiple touch points for a brand across all their channels, and advertising is just one contribution to driving an overall customer journey and a return on investment.
Cool. Shifting gears now to the emerging channel piece. Juliet, what Nick talked about, is that programmatic TV? Is that what we're talking about?
Okay, so I think you've got to break it down into almost two parts to that. So you've got programmatic and you've got TV. So, in terms of TV, audiences don't really care whether they're watching a program that's delivered through an internet connection or whether it's delivered through a traditional sort of broadcast pipe. It's just a great program that they have chosen to watch on whatever device it might be. So audiences are not necessarily distinguishing between internet-delivered television versus non-internet-delivered television. And I think it's really important that we all bear that in mind. It's about engaged audiences watching great quality content, professionally produced, long-form, broadcast quality content with absolute brand safety around it. That's TV. But when it comes to talking about programmatic, that's where we have to actually make a distinction because there are different things that are possible. When it comes to programmatic TV around kind of traditional non-internet delivered TV, programmatic is more around the automated process of planning and buying that TV supply, okay? Whereas when it comes to an internet-delivered version of TV, so connected TV, as Nick talked about with smart TVs, OTT devices, gaming console-delivered TV on a TV screen, or whether it's even desktop or mobile-delivered TV, that's where you've actually got a really clear opportunity for true programmatic in the sense of being able to buy an impression that is relevant to your brand because that audience is relevant to your brand. And so there's a clear distinction between TV when it comes to the planning and buying of that TV. There are also obviously different measurements in place, not only the viewability stuff that I just mentioned, but also in terms of audiences. When it comes to verification, you've obviously got OzTam in a TV world, and you've got Nielsen in some aspects to an internet-delivered world. But you've also got new initiatives that are coming out of the broadcast market at the moment, which in Australia I think is really interesting. So you've got a lot of the broadcasters here who are building out their login databases. With 9Now, it's obligatory to actually log in before you watch anything on the 9Now service across any of those devices. With 7, it's optional. With 10, it's some of the content that you log in to watch that content. But essentially, each of those broadcasters are building up really strong profiles around the audiences that are watching their stuff. And that doesn't only create opportunities for advertisers, it also creates opportunities for them as broadcasters, because they can then tailor the experience, the content, they can influence their commissioning decisions and so on, based on what they know about audiences and what those audiences want to watch on what device and at what time of the day and what day of the week, whether they want to binge watch, whether they want to just catch up on an episode, quite soon after it was made available to them online. So there's a huge amount of initiative going on now in the broadcast world in Australia that's creating some really great opportunity.
And Keith, from a global perspective, how are we? You saw where we're sort of heading in this market here through the team, but how are we on a scale to the rest of the markets? Are we keeping up with them? Are we trailing or?
I think you're out in front on the IP delivered, as you often are in Australia. So we break it down basically between, for the sort of broad premium video TV conversation, between an IP delivered stream that has a possibility of serving an ad on a one-to-one basis, and then a traditional television spot where you're essentially trying to understand the audience profile of a given commercial opportunity and then serve an ad into that. So for the connected TV business broadly, the global business has grown over 100% year over year, and Australia is going faster than that. The partnership with Telaria is a big part of that. But advertisers are very much leaning in, and I've seen what I would sort of deem more common sense with respect to how advertisers approach connected TV, and they understand that there's a low risk of fraud, even though we have to be proactive about fighting that. There's a high propensity for viewability for obvious reasons, and there's generally a great opportunity to drive brand lift and perception using it. So people have sort of gotten over the lack of third-party measurement that will come, the lack of ideal measurement from an attribution perspective that will come, and they've dived in with both feet, which I think relative to other channel opportunities makes a ton of sense. So it's great to see that. From a traditional linear TV perspective in the US, that business is growing well for us. It's nascent here. That business requires very granular data sets, and we've worked with OzTam on how those will evolve here. And it also requires a TV ecosystem that has a lot of different inventory opportunities, which means those potential commercial spots would be undersold, and thus with data we could bring value both to the advertiser and the publisher. We've solved that equation in the US. We haven't solved it here yet, though we'd very much like to continue trying.
Yeah. And we've talked around audio and TV, but is outdoor still a way off?
No, I think for us, outdoor will be a lean-in channel next year. There's various sort of efforts in different regions with different suppliers. The underlying infrastructure for outdoor is, in most cases, not like the underlying infrastructure for TV, which makes it challenging. Obviously, there's some businesses that are pure IP that actually have an underlying technology delivery infrastructure that makes advertising in a programmatic way more useful or possible or viable. But then some of the big outdoor companies just haven't set up their infrastructure in a way that makes it easy to interact with them. So that will be a rolling effort for us, but I think it gets started next year.
And Kathy, you've worked with some of the traditional markets at Suncorp. How have you navigated those conversations to say that radio is just audio or connected TV is just another screen?
Yeah, I really like the way you explained programmatic, but I suppose just more generally it's your channel mix, isn't it? So I think audio, connected TV, it's all really important. And I think for any advertiser, it's about, well, what are the experiences you want to really deliver? So definitely it's on the radar. I think the challenge is sort of what we already discussed, that measurement, connecting, providing that end-to-end customer experience, which will be obviously a challenge, I think, to everyone.
Yeah, and you've signed up with IAS, as I mentioned, but then that isn't available on connected TV. So if you had to then educate the market that your business...
Yeah, I think really the education started with marketers to start off with, and obviously no tech is going to be 100% perfect, and we recognise it and also recognise the gaps. And that was a really important aspect that we needed to educate our teams on, to say, well, yeah, walled garden, that affects it. But I think that's a really important discussion so that we also educate people on where the industry is going. I really like the showcases yesterday. I think it was Cindy talking about blue sky. Like, we know that tech will be able to deliver it. We may not know when, but we need to be working towards that future state. Really understanding that is obviously an important part.
Yeah, and Juliet, talking about measurement inside this world, no doubt there's TARPs that you've got to try and the traditional TV metrics, and now there's digital metrics. Do we meet in the middle, or do we...
It's a difficult question. I think there are some really exciting new initiatives that are coming out. So VOZ, for example, the new initiative coming out of OzTAM, I think is going to be really valuable and really interesting, because essentially that will allow broadcasters to understand exactly how many people they have reached across all devices with a show, as opposed to the current segmentation of linear versus catch-up, which is only representative of certain devices at the moment. So I think that those industry-wide initiatives, VOZ out of OzTAM being a really key one, is just hugely important for us understanding what audiences look like, and essentially what a campaign has achieved. There's still a long way to go, though.
Yeah, and on that connected TV piece, I think if we've all watched it, we've all had a pretty bad user experience where we've been over frequency capped, volumes up, volumes down. What are you guys doing in that space to try and make it a better advertising experience?
Well, pretty much every broadcaster that has started working with us has suddenly had a better experience, which is, it's essentially what we're there to do. So one of the things that broadcasters can do when they're working with us is they can ensure that frequency caps can be applied to campaigns. It sounds so basic, but it's not possible unless you've got a really great SSP that you're working with. There are no cookies, for example, so you've got to actually be able to use something else in order to frequency cap. The IAB has worked on a big initiative out of the States recently to standardise the IFA, which is essentially an ID that can be used in lieu of cookies. There are IDs that are readily accessible for mobile app and have been for about 4 years now, and that has allowed frequency capping to be really effective across mobile apps. So that's the IDFA and the ADID, dependent on whether you're Android or iOS. With connected TV, it's a little bit more complex, because you can have, 30 different systems that would pass through a completely different ID, and it's all just been a bit of a mess. But now that the IAB has come out with the IFA standards, we will have a very standard way of frequency capping across all of connected TV. In the interim, though, we have created solutions to work around that. So we have already been able to facilitate frequency capping across all of the supply that runs through our platform through connected TV. And we've been doing that for quite some time. So frequency capping is possible across connected TV. The other thing that creates a really good user experience is a broadcaster using what's called a server-side ad insertion partner. Essentially, that means that they use a partner whereby all of the ads are called upfront, prefetched, and then they get stitched into the content so that the whole thing plays out with absolutely no differentiation between the ad content versus the programming content. So that type of technology creates a better user experience, a better brand experience, and it benefits absolutely everybody. It certainly doesn't go without its challenges, but we work really hard with the broadcasters and with those server-side ad insertion partners to ensure that we're creating the best possible experience for everybody involved.
Cool. Keith, you got anything to add on that side from our perspective?
I think they covered it very well. The only thought I have around these emerging channels and measurement, and whether we're planning for TV or whether we're planning for digital, if you saw David Godsman, the CDO from Coke yesterday, he talked about the opposing forces between reach and frequency and mass personalization at scale. And I think that's a really pertinent issue that a lot of marketers are struggling with. You know, the rise of digital and programmatic and the sort of North Star that we have to get to mass personalization at scale as a meme in the industry is understandable, but I think the reality is there are lots of marketers where reach and frequency at the top of the funnel for broad awareness is the right media strategy. And so I think as we think about driving our industry forward with the IAB and others around measurement standards on these emerging channels, we have to be providing mechanisms that allow for measurement of both strategies. And often it's the same thing, and we can choose to measure reach and frequency using exposures on connected TV through the IFA, where we can frequency cap and have a reach and frequency measurement, but also have an attribution measurement that I had a one-to-one exposure with this particular IFA linked to a cookie, and I understand that I reached them in a couple different devices, and they ended up converting on this device, and I can measure it that way too. So I think we have to do both, because I don't think either strategy is going away, because different marketers need different things.
And we heard from Annalise talking about the VB jingle and the big ad. So creative sometimes does get lost in this space. How are you working with creative teams and your creative partners to make sure that you're building content and creative ads that are suited to these evolving channels?
To take that?
Anyone?
I suppose I can't really talk to what we're currently doing, but just to echo that point, creative is so important. So even when we're looking at viewability, yeah, that just makes sure we've got a potential to be viewed, but we can't lose sight of creative and having the emotion and really connecting to drive it, because that's what people want. So all I can really say is, yes, it's important. I would like to see more focus on that, but look, I think there's great work. I know at Suncorp there is great work happening, but we need to be creative-led, the message.
And Julia, are you working with different creative agencies?
No, we don't really work with the creative agencies as such. We work mainly with the DSPs and with the trading desks and so on. But one thing that I think is really interesting goes back to the stuff I was talking about with broadcasters creating the opportunity for audiences to log in and for them to then know who the audience is. And I think that what that can then do is not only create, addressable TV in terms of the right message going in front of the right person, but it can also open up the opportunity for the right creative going in front of the right person. So you can see that data and insights can actually create a much better user experience, not only because of the right brand being exposed to that right person, but even just, the creative. There could be multiple creatives for each and every brand campaign, and that could then create a far more tailored, unique, relevant experience. Not only in terms of who that person is, but where they are in terms of if they're a car buyer, for example, where are they in that process, and therefore what message do they need to be exposed to. So you can see that actually programmatic and addressability and data and insights can actually prove to create a huge amount of benefit, not only for the brand, but also for the user.
Cool. And we'll see more about it in the next session, but Keith, we're working much more closely with our Creative Cloud. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I mean, I think overall, we, as an industry have sort of created this disservice where we gave everyone a hammer and the ability to serve a ton of ads against a ton of people really cheaply, and that's where the focus has been for so many years. And I don't know if that drew focus away from creative or just created a situation where the effort was put on volume at the expense of creative quality and emotional interaction. So I think it's nice to see the industry reframing and focusing more on creative and getting more tools to increase content velocity and measure different creatives with different platforms. So I'll let the sales pitch happen in the next session, but you can expect Adobe, for obvious reasons, to build a lot of things that connect our creative tools, our creative libraries into our advertising platform and allow for the creative team and the media team and the brand manager to work more closely together in a workflow that is more seamless and allows for faster iteration of creative measurement back into the creative process. I mean, it's obviously an area we want to own, and we think we have a distinct capability to link up those various platforms in a way that creates value for our clients.
Great. So we've got a couple of minutes left. Just some closing comments. So, Kathy, what do you see for the next 12 months ahead?
Well, I'd like to see, I think, more from the industry and more focus on the supply side. So I suppose with our investment in IES, I'm really interested in seeing how top publishers now start to look at the quality of media that we're able to buy and trade and negotiate on, and really start to talk more to viewable CPMs, whatever that might be. I definitely think that needs to be a conversation. I'd really like to have that conversation because we saw the AANA, the IAB, MFA come out with their Australian Digital Ad Practices document. So I think the time is ripe and we've been waiting a bit too long to have that. So I'd love to see that.
Great. And Juliet?
I expect to see growth in connected TV because we've seen such a huge amount of growth over the past 12 months. You know, a year ago, you were seeing connected TV accounting for about 30% of most of the broadcasters' online video, and now it's accounting for more like between 40 and 55%, depending on which broadcaster you're looking at. So it's growing really significantly, and I think that's a really interesting piece of the pie because, again, it just creates more and more TV consumption, then therefore more and more opportunity in the market. I think measurement's going to be a big one. The right kind of measurement is going to be a big one. I'm hoping that people just start to apply common sense to viewability around connected TV because if there is no way of measuring it, then don't expect it to be measured, specifically with connected TV. But I think in terms of audience measurement and attribution and recognising the benefit and the impact of the activity, I think that's going to be the next key development.
Great. And Keith?
I think it's super exciting because we've gone through this 15 years of sort of what I described earlier where we built up programmatic, we brought in new channels, the industry sort of consolidated and sorted itself out. So we've got some level of standardization on these important issues, and we are trying to clean up the bad actors and generally making progress there. But now we're entering an era where there's seismic changes in the inventory situation and how the walled gardens approach the marketplace and how other premium content owners approach the marketplace. So I think that's a fascinating challenge for us as Adobe to continue to add value on top of those different inventory sources, but a daunting challenge for marketers to figure out how they invest across those inventory sources and measure as holistically as possible. So I think that's one thing that we're going to deal with over the next 5 years as a collective group. And the other thing I think is what I alluded to, which is, we're talking our book here, but I do think there's a huge opportunity to bring advertising more into the overall customer journey discussion and plan and execution and have it move from a silo to a really integrated part of how brands interact with their consumers.
Great. Thank you, guys. Please put your hands together for our panellists.